What's up, everybody, and welcome to the Fantasy Flex podcast. I'm your host, Chris Raybon, joined by my dude and one of the top fantasy rankers in the world, Sean Koerner. And today we are talking best ball. Sean, what's going on? How you feeling about best ball? You got a bunch of teams in already?
Yeah, I've been cranking away. Although this week it is Scott Fishbowl week. Are you even in it this year?
I'm not gonna play in it.
Oh, okay.
Like
Never
every
mind.
year I join it, and then like I just like
Yeah.
kind of I'm not fully paying attention to the draft, and then I'm not fully paying attention to my team. And it's like
Yeah.
it's like the one league that's so different from every other league. So yeah, I'm gonna just sit
I
this one out.
no,
But good luck.
yeah, thank you. We're in round 7. It's been a few days. We're in round 7, so we're trying along, slowly here. But I love it. I love the variety, the different strategy. But outside of this, yeah, been really focused on best ball. Have quite a few teams, so happy to dive in on our best ball tips.
Yeah, I mean, I've been drafting since like March, so I'm ready to go. Before we jump in, and we're gonna give you guys some tips before we even get started, like on best ball generally. Then we're gonna jump into players from each position that we like, and we're gonna close it out with something that a lot of people always ask about, which is stacks. So we'll each give 2 of our favorite stacks. So you're gonna get players, you're gonna get stacks, you're gonna get tips, everything you need to crush it in best ball this season. Before we get going, just want to remind you guys, leave us a 5-star rating and review if you enjoy the pod. And because we are calling out our favorite 5-star review right here on the show, and the winner gets a free year of an Action Network Pro subscription. This week's winner is IT Guru 28. We really appreciate the kind words, IT Guru 28. Hit up podcast at actionnetwork.com to claim your free year of Action Network Pro. Again, that's IT Guru 28. All right, let's jump right in to our tips. Sean, get us started here. What are you kind of looking at in terms of strategy when you're approaching best ball?
So, I mean, the overall tip you should take away is your main goal in best ball is to maximize the ceiling of your team. So all 3 of my tips will stem from this. And the reason for that is, unlike, season-long head-to-head formats where every week you just need to outscore your one opponent, in best ball, you have to outscore your entire league. So you're going to want to be more risky, go for upside. So that's my first tip is you want to target players that have built-in upside and or high variance players. So by built-in upside, you can get creative on what that means to you. But usually when I think of built-in upside, I think of rookies. Since their range of outcomes is fairly large when they enter the league, we don't really know how good or bad they will be entering the league. So they, by nature, they have some pretty built-in upside. Or running backs like Tony Pollard, who is explosive enough to have spiked weeks even when Zeke is healthy, but his built-in upside is he's a top 5 running back if Zeke were to ever miss time. Or players who could break out after disappointing rookie season. So guys like Trevor Lawrence, Zach Wilson, Kadarius Toney, basically anybody that can significantly outscore their ADP. So you got to get creative and, looking at guys that have built-in upside. And by high variance players, I just mean players who are volatile week to week, where they can post a gigantic score one week and maybe the next week they put up a dud. Think of wide receivers like Deshaun Jackson, Tyler Lockett, Will Fuller, or Marquez Valdez-Scantling, those big play threat type of guys. And the reason is, I mean, whenever they have a dud, you're not going to get their score, but when they have a big week, you get it, and you don't need to figure out what week that'll be. So that's the beauty of best ball, and that's why those types of players are more valuable.
Yeah, I really like that one. This is what best ball is all about. That's a great breakdown of how you got to look at the ceilings. So I totally agree. I think that's the number one thing people have to take away from it. My first tip is don't handcuff. And this is something that if you're kind of more familiar or you started out playing just traditional redraft, you might spend a high pick on a running back. You want some insurance. You start handcuffing. Or maybe you do something like a Kamara and an Ingram or something like that. Murray, and I know was in the years past as well. But in best ball, to your point, you're trying to maximize your ceiling here. So you have to think of kind of telling a story with your lineup and looking at how things will play out over a full year. And so if you draft a running back early And you shouldn't need to handcuff him. If you have to handcuff that running back, your team is probably already sunk, because that's just the nature of best ball. That's why with best ball, you're usually drafting, maybe 10, 20, 50, 100, even more teams, depending on how much of a degenerate you are. But you're really playing the long game. You're playing the exposure game. You're playing the portfolio game. And so on an individual roster, if I have Aaron Jones, I don't want AJ Dillon. If I have AJ Dillon, I don't want Aaron Jones. I don't even want like Benny Snell if I have Najee Harris, because I need to maximize every roster slot for upside. And doing, handcuffing is just going to it's going to raise my floor, but it's going to lower my ceiling. And where instead I'm essentially using 2 slots for one, kind of one startable player, where I need to do that per slot. I can't use 2 slots on one startable player. So not handcuffing, I think, is really important. And to a lesser extent, just in general, kind of not really rostering those reverse correlations. Like, you don't really want to do quarterback, running back on the same team, and things like that. Obviously, you can stack. We'll talk about that. I think you're going to talk about that next, but not handcuffing is a big one for me.
Yeah, I love that call, because handcuffing, it can be a decent strategy in head-to-head because you're trying to raise your team's floor. But in best ball, it's go big or go home, baby. So why mitigate your risk by doing that? So love that call. So tip number 2 for me is stacking 1 to 3 pass catchers with 1 to 3 of your quarterbacks. So by doing this, you significantly raise your weekly and overall ceiling of your team. So you're going to have 2 to 4 players every week, where if they have a spike game, that's going to correlate with each other. And this could also correlate over the course of the season. So if you take Jared Goff as your QB 26 and he finishes as a QB 12, it's very likely that Amon-Ra St. Brown, TJ Hawkinson, other Lions players probably outperform their ADP as well. Like, that's how Goff had a good season. Therefore, if you draft like an Amon-Ra St. Brown and a TJ Hawkinson earlier in the draft, you should absolutely sort of go out of your way to get Jared Goff. And I'm not saying take him a couple rounds earlier than you should go, but if you're in kind of like a toss-up situation, you should obviously kind of go with stacking your players. So I kind of use the first few rounds to dictate which offenses I might want to stack. Or later on, you can get some pretty cheap stacks, which we'll talk about. But this is another sneaky way to really raise the ceiling of your team.
Yeah, and that's probably, I like to do it with all of my quarterbacks if I can. I usually draft 2. So I totally agree. I try to do it as with pass catching as much as I can, and then just try to build a good running back core around there that isn't correlated, to the passing games, I guess you could say, that I'm stacking. My tip number 2 is aim for 16 full games of upside, or just the maximum amount of games of upside that you can get. And what I mean by that is any game that a player is going to be in a starting role, in a major role, is what I consider, maximizing a game of upside. So this applies in a lot of different ways. For one, means I don't want to draft players that are coming into the season injured. We talk about this a lot, and even in redraft, I'm not a big fan of it. But in something like best ball, it's like, I don't want who's going to miss 2 games from suspension. I don't want a guy that's going to miss games to start the season. Yes, I know that, those guys, they're not going to count to my roster early in the year, but we got to remember they're going to be volatile even once they return from injury. So they're still not going to give me, it's not like they're just guaranteed to give me all startable weeks even once they come back. Guys, I'm thinking about Michael Gallup, I'm thinking about Chris Godwin, maybe Sterling Shepard, maybe Michael Thomas, guys like that. I really don't want to kind of invest in those guys because of the uncertainty, because I don't want to give up games, because games are so important. In best ball, you only have a fixed number of roster spots, and you cannot IR somebody if they're hurt. You cannot drop somebody if they're hurt. So I need 16 games. And when I say 16, because 7 weeks, 18 isn't counting. So I know it's a 17 game season, but I'm saying 16 games of upside. And this applies at quarterback as well, because what I see a lot of people doing And I think, even I've made this mistake in the past of kind of drafting a quarterback that, could win the starting job at some point in the year. I
Mhm.
really don't think you need to do that in best ball, unless you really think that quarterback has a chance to start like week 2, like it, because if like I rather get like a Jared Goff, somebody that's kind of guaranteed to start all
Yeah.
year than taking a chance on like a Desmond Ritter or somebody like that, or even the opposite side of it of a Marcus Mariota, who we don't know if he would start. He might have some big weeks while he's in there, but can he keep that job all season? So I like to take the unsexy kind of guys that are more kind of locked in to their starting roles, that Jared Goff, Zach Wilson, can't really see any reason why he would be benched, even if he's really bad, guys like that, because I'm really relying on my QB1 to give me a lot of production. And so my QB2, I just need him to make sure that he's giving me solid production when my quarterback 1 is on bye, and just giving me a little bit more, of a chance on weeks my quarterback 1 might be average. And so I just need the games again. So aim for your 16 full games of a season, and try to maximize their upside that way. Don't give away games. Don't give away potential, bench, zeros just because a guy's not even in the starting lineup. So that's how I play it.
Yeah, I love that call. And this is a strategy I do use sort of in season long formats, because I always say if I draft Alvin Kamara and he's out the first 6 games, I could probably survive that. And I'm really just trying to maximize my team's ceiling in the fantasy playoffs. And I think I can still make the playoffs even without Alvin Kamara. But like you said, in best ball, every single week counts. So you don't want to forfeit games, unless you're one of those tournaments, the $1 million grand prize or something. Maybe in those formats, you are trying to maximize the last few weeks. But yeah, great advice. And then, for my third and final tip, it's all about roster construction. I think that's your third tip too, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we could probably just go through each position, just saying kind of like how we approach it in general. Like every draft is going to be different. But when it comes to your average, draft where you draft 18 players, start 1 quarterback, start 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, 1 tight end, 1 flex. I like to draft 2 quarterbacks.
Mm-hmm.
Like you said, you want to draft 2 quarterbacks that you can project safely for 16 or more games. So I don't get crazy there. You don't have to draft early. You just want 2 good quarterbacks. I rarely take 3. Sometimes, if you take a gamble on a guy, like you said, like I wouldn't do it, but a Mitch Trubisky, a player you can't bank on starting the whole season, you're going to have to take another quarterback. Or if you screw up and take 2 QBs that have the same bye week, you got to take a third quarterback. But in general, I try to draft 2 exactly.
And I would just add on to that, and like, if I'm drafting a Mitch Trubisky, a week 1 starter that doesn't have job security, Marcus Mariota is another one I think that comes to mind. Maybe whoever starts in Seattle as well. Still drafting 2 quarterbacks, because what I'm saying is that, okay, this is a bet on Marcus Mariota starting 17 games. This is a bet on Mitch Trubisky, and it's a low risk. It's kind of like a low risk bet. It's a QB2. Obviously, things could go wrong. Maybe he loses his job in week 8, but you still have a QB1 that should be decent enough to still carry you through those weeks. So because I think a lot of times what can happen is you can compound the issue to it. Like, if let's say you hit on Mitch Trubisky, right? Like, then you don't need that third quarterback, right? I actually always kind of draft 2 quarterbacks and just treat it as a bet. Now, I don't like to go there, but if I do, that's what I'm gonna do. Because I think if I hit on my QB1 and I hit on Trubisky or Mariota, then that third roster spot is wasted. So I'm actually a pretty strict 2 QB guy.
Yeah, well, to be honest, when you're drafting Trubisky that late, like there's not much else you can do. But I agree that kind of goes with the go big or go home aspect. And you could do the other way. A guy like Desmond Ritter, who probably won't start week 1, but he has the potential to start earlier in the season. So your first quarterback would have to carry you until their bye week, and then you're kind of banking on Ritter having the starting job by then. So you can go both ways, but either way, it definitely goes with the go big or go home strategy that you should have when you're drafting in best ball.
Yep. Do you want to keep going?
Yeah. So running backs. I typically like to draft about 5 exactly.
Mhm.
And in head-to-head formats, you know me, like I like to have my entire bench full of just, high upside backup running backs ready to go. But you can't do that in best ball, like you said. If you have Alexander Madison on your team, and he's turning out 0 points, that's useless. So he'll only provide you value if and when Dalvin Cook misses time. That's a bit dicey in best ball. I certainly think you could draft one of those players. But you want to draft 3 to 5 running backs that you can kind of count on, at least 10 games of production each. Doesn't mean you need to draft them early. I don't think you need to draft 3 running backs really early in the draft, but you got to be smart about it. And typically, if you draft 5 running backs and you're smart about it, that should be fine. I don't. When you draft more than that, you're kind of just lowering your team ceiling a little bit. You could draft, 3 or 4 and just be super aggressive. That's one way to do it, but in general, I think 5 is the magic number for me.
Yeah, same way. I'm pretty strict on roster construction with that, so I'll get into it more. But I totally agree.
And then wide receiver, I think this is the position you want to build out the most depth. So I typically have 7 to 8 wide receivers. Sometimes I go up to 10, depending on how things are going. But wide receivers are pretty volatile week to week. So since you have to start 3 of them each week, it's smart to have a lot of different options. And any excess high scores that you have can be used in your flex. So just having a ton of wide receivers is just a good strategy in general. And that's a position I do like to target early on. We talk about it's really hard to kind of hit on these lower end receivers later in the draft. It's really hard for them to really step up in terms of a running back. A backup running back just needs one injury and they can, become an RB1 or RB2. Wide receiver, it's a little bit more difficult. So I do like to invest early and often in wide receiver because you really want to fill out, 7 to 9 wide receivers in most builds.
Yeah, I totally agree. That's the position that matters the most because it's you're not gonna find those like a third backup running back is not gonna unless somebody gets hurt, they're not gonna give you like one of those big games you need for best ball. Whereas like a third or fourth receiver could. So you like those draft picks are important too. Like later on in the draft, I think a lot of people are just kind of going through the motions sometimes, but those picks are really important.
Yep, absolutely. And then tight end, I think 2 to 3 makes sense. Maybe you want to get a top 5 or 7 tight end early, and then you could get 2 cheaper ones later. But the tight end position is sort of touchdown dependent, which does bode well for best ball. You don't need to kind of figure out when a guy like a Hunter Henry will score a touchdown. You just get the spiked weeks when they happen. So it's kind of nice in that regard. Tight end 2, 3 kind of guys can be frustrating in season long leagues, but in best ball, it's pretty easy to kind of have a nice little 2 to 3 tight end combo where you don't really need to spend up for 2 of them. So I probably like to spend up for 1 and then just try to find 2 diamonds in the rough. So I usually end up with 2 to 3 tight ends. How about you?
Yeah, I'm usually going for 2.
Oh, okay.
It's kind of the same. It's kind of that same strategy thing as quarterbacks, where it's like I'm really relying on my tight end number 1. If I whiff on my tight end number 1, I'm probably not winning a best ball week, right? It's just like so. My tight end 2 is just kind of to give me, no tight end is gonna have like every single week 100% startable week. So just trying to get through and kind of covers for some of those, the few down weeks that they do have in the bye week. If I taking a third one, because tight ends average fewer points than any other position, I just feel like it's kind of the same thing as taking like a third quarterback. It's like you shouldn't need it. If you do, you're probably not in a position to win your league anyway, which means you don't need it. So that kind of goes into my third tip, which is I'm actually pretty strict 2 quarterback, 2 tight end, but my advice on top of that is go into the last 2 rounds of the draft. Like make sure, even if you do differ a little bit in your philosophy, and maybe you do want a third tight end, maybe you do want a third quarterback, definitely don't take that player before the last 2 rounds. Like I always have that maximum roster flexibility going into the last few rounds. So you can look at your roster and say, if you do have to, deviate from the norm with your roster construction, you have the flexibility to do it based on what you've built so far. So
Right.
let's say, like you said, sometimes you can do 4 running backs. Like if I took running backs in rounds 1 through 4, maybe, let's say, I'm counting on those guys. Like I have 4 guys in the top 4 rounds. I probably don't need that running back 5.
Yeah.
So I don't want to like take some guy in the 13th or 14th round just to have that 5th running back. If I know that I'm going to get to the like round 17 and 18 and say, hey, you know what? Maybe I don't need another running back. Maybe because I waited till the 5th round to take a receiver. Maybe I want to go with 8 receivers instead of or 9 receivers here in this spot. So I think I think kind of maintaining your roster flexibility with an eye on always being able to maximize your receivers, as you mentioned,
Yep.
is key, because I think you don't want to have too many quarterbacks. You don't want to have more than 2 quarterbacks. You don't want to have more than 2 tight ends, and you definitely don't want to have more than 5 running backs. I've taken 6 on occasion, but I don't want to go into the last 2 rounds with 6. I want to have that opportunity to look at my roster and say, you know what, this guy would actually work on this roster. Maybe it's anti-fragile, or a lot of times what happens is, I'm sitting there and I have the choice between maybe a running back or a receiver, and I say, okay, maybe this team's like 4th wide receiver. Like maybe I can get like a guy like, I don't know, like on a really good passing team and get their like 3rd or 4th wide receiver cheap, and I already have the quarterback. I'm saying, okay, this might actually give my lineup more upside here than just taking another running back who I don't think is really going to be useful anyway, or something like that. Or so I always have that flexibility, and just build the core of your team kind of early, and then leave those last couple of rounds for maximum flexibility. Don't kind of paint yourself into a corner with 2, 3 quarterbacks, 3 tight ends, too many running backs or anything like that.
Yep, exactly.
All right, let's jump into each position, and we'll just talk briefly about a player that we kind of like, particularly for best ball, aka a guy we expect to be a little bit high variance or high ceiling, or both. Sean, start us out with quarterback.
So obviously on my our last pod, I made it very clear Jalen Hurts is my main QB target in all formats. He's phenomenal for best ball. But I did notice that Tom Brady, his ADP is slipping a bit in best ball. His ADP is down to QB 10. And I think people are correct in sort of downgrading him with Antonio Brown, Rob Gronkowski being gone. Chris Godwin might not be available in the first few games. Bruce Arians and Pro Bowl left guard Ali Marpet retired. There's a lot of things to be concerned about, but he might not put up the same numbers as last year, but he'll still be good. And just because he doesn't have rushing upside doesn't mean that Brady doesn't have weekly upside. He was the QB2 in best ball points added last year. He's going to get you a ton of 3 touchdown games, 400-yard passing games. So he does have a high weekly ceiling. But also, I think this offense is going to be much cheaper to stack this year and more concentrated. I'll talk about later when we talk about the stacks. But, Mike Evans should have a big year. Russell Gage could, fill in the Antonio Brown role. Cam Brate is going to step in for Gronk. So I think this offense as a whole is going to be cheaper to stack, starting with Tom Brady at QB 10.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems silly. And I think, I kind of want us to get some angry Tom this year, because, I don't know if you've been reading, ESPN's been doing like they kind of interview a bunch of personnel executives and people around the league and get these top 10 lists of each position. And for quarterback, Tom Brady was 4th. He was behind Rodgers, Mahomes, and Josh Allen. So like, I think we could get some angry Tom this year. Like he's QB4 in those rankings. He's QB 10 in fantasy. Like the disrespect is crazy right now.
And this might be his last season, so that's even more motivation, right?
Yeah, and I mean, he retired and came back, so he's clearly got the urge. Like he's not satisfied yet. So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Anytime you can get the guy like QB 10 who has like QB1 overall, and quarterbacks score the most points, so therefore like fantasy number 1 overall upside, I think you take it.
Yeah.
For me, Daniel Jones, he's the QB 21 in best ball ADP. I talked about this on a few pods here, but he was 18th in points per game among quarterbacks last year. He had about just under 30% of the time he had a 21 plus point game. But then there was a big gap where the rest of his games were 16, 16 and a half points or fewer. So, betting on Daniel Jones this year, the line is better. He should have healthier receivers. They got another kind of explosive guy in Wan'Dale Robinson. So I think you're just kind of betting that, that gap, I think he's still going to have that gap and have some of those bad games, but just kind of betting on the percentage of good games kind of increases under, Brian Daboll and this new coaching regime. We saw Daboll do the same thing for Josh Allen in Buffalo. Yep. And even Daniel Jones, like we've seen Daniel Jones put up some high upside performances. His rookie year, he had 3 games with 4 or more touchdown passes. He had a few 300+ yard games. And we know he could do it with his legs as well. So there's a lot of different ways that we've already seen Daniel Jones produce upside in this league. And now I think you could take a very low risk bet on him doing so again at a higher clip that he has in these past few years in what was just a bad situation.
Yeah, he was going to be my pick if it wasn't Tom Brady, and he fits my number one tip, a player with built-in upside and high variance. Obviously, he's going to have some duds. We're well aware of that, but he has some massive upside. He can have some fluky games throwing the ball, a few touchdowns, and he has pretty significant rushing upside. So in this, new scheme under Daboll, the sky's the limit for him. So love getting him outside of the top 20 for sure.
All right, let's jump to running back. Who you got?
It's Kareem Hunt, and he's really the ideal running back in basically all formats in the middle rounds. I always say he, AJ Dillon, Tony Pollard, those kind of guys I really like to target in the middle rounds. But in best ball, his ADP is running back 30. That's highway robbery. I mean, he will probably outscore that, even if Nick Chubb is healthy all season. Kareem Hunt, he was the RB8 after 6 games last year when Nick Chubb was fully healthy. And then if and when Chubb were to miss time, Kareem Hunt is probably going to be a top 5 running back. So that's what I'm talking about with built-in upside. He's going to have spiked weeks no matter what, but he can have some really spiked weeks if Chubb were to miss time. And also, they might have to start Jacoby Brissett for the first 4, maybe all 17 games this year, depending on Deshaun Watson. So they could be an even more run-heavy team, and they do like to limit Chubb, 15 to 17 carries a game. So Kareem Hunt could see a pretty big workload, even when they're both healthy. And there's a chance he'd get traded, and he would end up in a situation where he'd be probably the workhorse back there. So there's just a lot of angles and outs to Hunt just crushing his ADP at RB30 in best ball.
Yeah, and one of his biggest assets, and it kind of goes under the radar, we're not talking about as much, but that Cleveland O-line is one of the best in the league. Some people would argue it is the best. I mean, I know they're the only, they're kind of replacing the center, Nick Harris, but Nick Harris graded out pretty well in Pro Football Focus, in the limited time that he's been in action. And, so there's nothing to suggest that he will kind of be a major weak link. And then they got Jedrick Wills and Bitonio, Teller, Conklin at the other 4 spots. So, there's going to be holes for Kareem Hunt to run through. For my running back, I'm going Damian Harris. He's a guy that in regular redraft, I'm actually a little bit down on, but I think he's actually perfect for best ball because number one, he's got that breakaway ability. Like he had 33.3% of his runs come on breakaways, which was 5th in the league. And then he had 5 100-yard games and 15 overall games played. So about 1/3 of the time he's breaking 100 yards. He also had multiple touchdowns in 20% of his games. So he's a guy that week to week, and these are the kind of guys I like in best ball too at running back. Like week to week, he's going to be dependent on game script, but he has huge upside whenever they have good game script. The Patriots should be pretty solid in year 2 of Mac Jones. And so you don't have to worry about those games where maybe he only carries like 10 times for 30 yards because the Patriots fall behind early on in the game. But when the Patriots are having good games, even if Stevenson does kind of cut into his workload, usually when the Patriots are rolling, they can support 2 running backs in like a win. Like the Patriots are one of the more high scoring teams in the league last year. That's why Damian Harris had such a big year, and why I think he's getting a little overdrafted in some formats, but he's perfect for best ball. I was, another guy I thought about was Rashad Penny, but I think Harris actually has a little bit firmer grip on the starting job just because of his success last year. over kind of a longer period of time than Penny, who Pete Carroll always seems to try to like phase out, and they drafted Ken Walker, obviously. So I like Damian. I don't love him in redraft, but I do like him in best ball.
Yep, love it. He's a high variance player. Anytime you have a guy that's more touchdown and game script dependent, they're going to be more volatile. So yeah, I love Harris as more of a best ball option where he can be kind of a headache and head to head trying to figure out when he's going to go off. Best ball, it doesn't matter. You're going to get those spiked weeks no matter what.
Yeah, and there's a few other guys that fit that mold. I mean, Penny, I think, is one. Elijah Mitchell,
Penny for sure.
Elijah Mitchell comes to mind as well. Like all those guys that in redraft, you're kind of like, no, I don't know, kind of frozen pond.
Yeah,
that best ball is the pond is. We could skate on the frozen pond in best ball.
Exactly.
Let's go to wide receiver. Who you got?
So I mentioned him earlier, but Marquez Valdez-Scantling is sort of the poster child for an ideal best ball wide receiver. I mean, he's a deep threat, so that in itself means he's going to be pretty volatile. Some weeks he'll go off for 3 catches, 100 yards, and 2 touchdowns. The next week he'll have 0 catches. That doesn't matter in best ball. You don't need to figure out when that'll happen. And he had a bit of a down year last year, battling various injuries, and he still managed to finish 46 in best ball points added per game for wideouts that played 9 games or more. He's going from the Packers to the Chiefs, which isn't exactly a downgrade. He could be Patrick Mahomes' main deep threat, which is pretty valuable in itself. And apparently he's been pretty impressive in camp so far. So, he could be even more than just a deep threat in this offense, which will help his weekly floor. But either way, he's going to come loaded with massive upside every single week. So even though his ADP is a bit steep in best ball at wide receiver 44, I think it's warranted. And, he's, like I said, he's a guy you don't need to figure out when he's going to have a good week. In best ball, you just get them.
Yeah, and I mean, not that we believe in puff piece season, but at least the puff pieces are there for Scantling. I've heard good things about Valdez-Scantling coming out of camp. A lot of people are saying he looks like he's the guy that stands out the most.
It's not too, he's talented. He's fast. Like, I get that sometimes the puff pieces can be out of control, but I kind of figured MVS would fit right in Kansas City.
For me, I'm going, and this is crazy. So Marquez Valdez-Scantling's a wide receiver 44 in ADP. And he's obviously the poster child here, but
yeah,
I could get Tyler Lockett at wide receiver 47, 3 spots after MVS. I know that Baker Mayfield's out of the running for the Seattle quarterback, and that's why these guys are in free fall. But Tyler Lockett, like, all right, first of all, 5 100-yard games last year. Seattle's going to be bad. I don't think that they're going to be great on defense. I don't think they're going to be able to run the ball a ton. They're going to have to be thrown at some point. And, Tyler Lockett, even with Russell Wilson not at his best last year and missing some games, Tyler Lockett outscored in terms of points per game and half PPR guys like Keenan Allen, DeAndre Hopkins, Hunter Renfrow, Jalen Waddle, DK Metcalf, CeeDee Lamb, AJ Brown, Brandon Cooks, Michael Pittman, DJ Moore, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Amari Cooper. Like, Tyler Lockett wasn't like, he didn't just fall off a cliff. The quarterback situation is not ideal, but I just think this is not a situation where it's just crazy disrespect. He's going to be a high variance guy, obviously, now without Russell Wilson, but all the tools are still there skill wise and target wise, because it's just him and Metcalf really. I think, Noah Fant obviously will be there at tight end, but I don't think he's factoring in a major way in terms of Lockett or Metcalf's targets. So I think those two are going to be target hogs. So wide receiver 47 for a guy on a bad team that's going to have to throw, and a guy who's put up big games in the past and outscored a bunch of studs as recent as last year and really does it every year. Yep. I love it at wide receiver 47. I don't have to worry about the games where Geno Smith or Drew Lock just overthrows him 5 times in the same game, because I got him at wide receiver 47.
Exactly, and I mentioned him as one of the high variance wide receivers that are perfect for best ball. And yeah, he had that 12 catch, 142 yard game with Geno Smith under center. I think even when Drew Lock's under center, I mean, Drew Lock sucks, but he can be a gunslinger, Drew Lock takes risks. Sometimes they're not smart, but that doesn't matter with Tyler Lockett. So he'll definitely still have spiked weeks with either Geno Smith or Drew Lock under center, and you just get him at cheaper prices here because of it. So yeah, love that call as well. And when he does have those spiked weeks, every single point matters. When Tyler Lockett has those 40-point games in head-to-head league, you only need to beat your one opponent. So at a certain point, the 40-point game can only help so much, but in best ball, every point matters. So when he has those few like massive games, that's huge. So yeah, last year he finished 10th at wide receiver and best ball points added according to my metric. So yeah, he's the perfect type of guy to target in best ball.
And let's finish it off with tight ends before we jump into stacks. Who do you like for best ball at the tight end position?
So I think Hunter Henry in that tight end 17 range is perfect for best ball because he's sort of a touchdown dependent, I guess you would say, tight end. He had 9 touchdowns last year, which tied for the most at the tight end position, but he had 10 end zone targets, which ranked inside the top 2. So I think he'll be pretty stable this year. He might not score 9, but I think 6 to 8 might be a safe bet. But also week to week, towards the end of the season, he was running over 80% routes run over the last 5 games, and he was the tight end 4 over that stretch. So he was clearly the main tight end. I think we kind of thought it'd be a committee with him and Jonnu Smith, but he's the man there. And if they let Mac Jones air it out a bit more in year 2, Henry's going to benefit. So again, he's in that sort of range where he might be kind of annoying in head-to-head leagues trying to figure out when he's going to score his touchdown or 2 a game. So in best ball, it doesn't matter. You're going to get those spiked weeks no matter what.
Yeah, I love Hunter Henry. I think he's undervalued just across the board. And yeah, this is perfect because I think Mac Jones could take a step forward. And Hunter Henry, he, for whatever reason, it was just the Hunter Henry show last year. Like there was no Jonnu Smith barely worked in. So I like me some Hunter Henry. I think people should be drafting him pretty much everywhere. For me, I'm going to go Cameron Brate at tight end. He's tight end 23. And I mean, the crazy stat for Cameron Brate that really stands out is he was tied for 9th in the entire National Football League last year in red zone targets. That was with Gronk on the team. That was with Antonio Brown on the team sometimes. That was with Chris Godwin there. That was with Mike Evans there. This dude had 20 red zone targets. He had 57 total targets. 20 of them. 20. Now you're telling me he's gonna get the tight end 1 snaps and this is a situation where it's even I know they got the rookie Kate Ott in there too, but the likelihood is that if Godwin misses time, maybe they go to more 2 tight end sets. I don't really see Brate losing the job this year because of how much they trust him where it matters on the field most. So they essentially use him to maximize his skill set, and say, okay, when it's time to score touchdowns, we're gonna get Cameron Brate in a game. Because he had it's just absurd. He had as many red zone targets as Mark Andrews.
Crazy.
He had as many red zone targets as Justin Jefferson.
Right.
It's Justin fucking Jefferson.
Well, and no one's going to confuse Cam Brate with Kyle Pitts in terms of talent, right?
Yeah, because he can actually score touchdowns.
Right, exactly. Well, but he's getting targets from Tom Brady, not Marcus Mariota. So that is favorable for Cam Brate. And you mentioned Kate Otten. That's his only competition right now. They also lost OJ Howard.
Yep.
On top of Gronk leaving. I would be a little bit more worried if they drafted, Trey McBride in round 2, but the fact that they waited, round 4 to get Kate Otten, that bodes very well for Cam Brate. So I have no idea why he's still just the tight end 23 right now. It's insane.
I don't think people have looked at these red zone targets. And listen, I know red zone targets not the easiest thing to predict year over year, but it makes sense, right? Tom Brady, you're gonna have just like you said, we're talking about Tom Brady, this guy has a ton of upside. They're going to move the ball up and down the field. And now they're going to need other guys to step up because you have no AB, because Godwin's going to be out. Russell Gay's not really a touchdown scorer. I wouldn't be surprised if he got 8 or 9 because of Brady, but I would be equally not as surprised if Cam Brate got 8 or 9 because of Brady. So yeah, really like me some Cam Brate at tight end 23. All right, let's go to the main event. Let's talk stacks. And as we talked about it earlier, this is something I think you have to do in best ball to not only differentiate your squad, but really kind of lock in that upside and that correlated production that's going to get you to the top. Because in best ball, you're self-explanatory. You're trying to be the best. Like, you're not trying to just get to the playoffs. You're trying to be the highest scoring team in your league. And depending on how, the different type of formats you're playing in, that week could be, 12, or it could be 12,000. But either way, you're trying to really maximize that upside. So I do think you have to stack your pass catchers. So with that in mind, we're going to do 2 of our favorite stacks each. So lead us off.
So the first offense I love to stack is the Minnesota Vikings. And, part of it has to do with they're changing their scheme. They're moving on from a very defensive-minded conservative head coach and Mike Zimmer to, more innovative Sean McVay disciple and Kevin O'Connell. So this offense will likely mimic the Rams offense and be a bit more up-tempo, pass-heavy. And more importantly, the targets are going to be heavily concentrated. They're not going to be rotating in wide receivers and tight ends. So I love stacking Kirk Cousins with, hopefully you can get Justin Jefferson in the first round, but if not, guys like Adam Thielen, KJ Osborne are pretty cheap, and Irv Smith at tight end. So I think, drafting 3 or 4 of those guys on the same team offers you massive upside, because this offense should be a lot more fantasy friendly. And they just don't have much competition with, other guys on the roster. So that I love that aspect as well, where, all 3 receivers are probably going to be running over 90% routes run. Irv Smith, hopefully, will be over 70%. So all these 4 guys will be on the field most of the time. So I love stacking them up with Kirk Cousins.
Yeah, I like that. Kirk Cousins, I like investing in Minnesota in a variety of ways. I think, on the betting tip, I think they're underpriced to win the division at plus 265. Kirk Cousins threw 68 touchdowns to 20 picks since Justin Jefferson came in the league. So I like that one a lot. I think with O'Connell, this offense could blow up. I think Jefferson could have a Cooper Kupp like season, because O'Connell oversaw that. Adam Thielen seems to just not care about regression. Every year it's just like, Adam Thielen's gonna regress. It's like, no, another double-digit touchdown year for him.
Well, yeah, Osborne and Jefferson will get the ball down the field, and Thielen will just catch the touchdown.
Yeah,
right.
Perfect. No, but I really like that one. And I should also mention, as I get into my number one stack, that I think this is a time where you really want to invest in those pocket passers too. Like, and this is how you can kind of do it in a way that gives you some added upside, because you're not always going to get a Jalen Hurts. You're not always going to get a Daniel Jones even late in the draft. You're not going to get those kind of guys with that rushing upside that we love. And so one way around that is to increase the upside of your team is you take these pocket passers, but you stack them up. And so you're really kind of hoping to get those, 2 or 3 or 4 pocket passers that tend to pop and jump into that top 12 in production. And then they should give you enough spike weeks to get it done. So with that in mind, Devontae Adams, Darren Waller, Hunter Renfrow, Derek Carr. I just love that one. I think Derek Carr has, played really well these last couple of years even, I think. Remember last year, he had some monster games in terms of the yardage, and that was without Devontae Adams here. So I really like that you can kind of, these guys are all going at different parts of the draft that you can kind of scoop up, Adams in round 2 and Waller in round 4 and Renfrow in round 6. And then, Carr later on when you're drafting your quarterback. So none of them, you're not really having to reach to draft any of these guys. They're in such an explosive division where they play 6 games against Russell Wilson, Justin Herbert, and of course, Patrick Mahomes. So, and the defense probably still won't be that great. And on top of that, the last receiver who you can kind of, if you have that last roster spot open, you might even want to draft a Robinson or a Keelan Cole. But the whole thing is the target should really be concentrated among Adams, Waller, and Renfrow. And that should be enough. So I really love Derek Carr with his top 3.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, I can't believe you just recommended drafting DeMarcus Robinson, but I think it helps. It helps your stack because, like, imagine he's in the 11 formation where he's out there running wind sprints, not getting targets, just taking a defender with him. It's just going to even more concentrate targets to Adams, Renfro, and Waller, which is what you want to stack. Like, they can take turns having a huge game, but every week it's one of those 2 or 3 of those guys are going to give you production. So yeah, love the Raiders stack as well.
Who you got for your second one?
So it's got to be the Buccaneers stack, right? I mean, Tom Brady's a little too cheap right now. Mike Evans is the most expensive player to stack, but he's well worth it right now. I mean, he's going to have a massive season. He's an ideal best ball target in himself. I mean, he's a touchdown machine. So the first, few weeks where Chris Godwin's out, I mean, Evans is going to just go off. I like sneaking Russell Gage in there. I agree with you. I don't think he's going to be a huge touchdown scorer, but he should play that Antonio Brown role, get a ton of, receptions, yards. And then Cam Brate right now, I just don't see the competition right now at tight end. So he's going to get, the Gronkowski and OJ Howard targets are left behind. I'm not too worried about K-Dot, and, they drafted him in the 4th round. He's a rookie. So I just love how much more concentrated the offense is going to be and how they're a lot cheaper than they were last year.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, you're getting Tom Brady down there at QB 10. So really, you just going to target Mike Evans early. And then the other 2 guys are going to be pretty easy to get. And like, yeah, I would include Russell Gage in there. I mean, I don't think you can go with Godwin just because it doesn't really fit the strategy, but love Brate and love Evans this year. I mean, I think Evans is another guy kind of going under the radar. I know he's going highly in drafts, but I think he should be going even higher. He should be going even higher. He just doesn't ever disappoint.
Yeah.
So yeah, I love it. For me, I'm gonna go with kind of the poor man's version of that, like with a quarterback who's kind of older and has MVP upside, but people are down on it. Even I'm down on a regular redraft, but I think I did mention this. This is how I'm gonna attack Aaron Rodgers. It's gonna be in best ball stacks because I can get Rodgers, outside the top 10 quarterbacks, and I can get any receiver I want outside the top 100 picks. I know Lazard has been climbing in some leagues, but you're still getting him pretty late. So Aaron Rodgers, Allen Lazard, and the rookie Christian Watson are the 3 guys I think that I want to stack up. And I think you can actually, and this is one of the ones where you can get creative. Now, if you like, maybe Romeo Dubes, if you like Randall Cobb, if you think, any of those guys are going to, or even Amari Rodgers, you could take a last round pick on one of those guys. I don't think you have to, but there's a lot of flexibility in terms of who you use. I wouldn't use Tunyon because I don't know. I don't think we know when he's coming back and how good he'll be. And he wasn't very good last year, but I mean, even he's an option if we get word that he's going to play the full season, which I don't think so at this point. But you can also even use Aaron Jones. I think this is one of the exceptions because Aaron Rodgers had 40 touchdowns last year, 37 passing, 3 rushing. So that's 40 touchdowns. Aaron Jones had 10 touchdowns. So like now there's just not many quarterback running back combos that can give you 50 touchdown upside. Rodgers and Jones can, and Aaron Jones caught six receiving touchdowns last year. So I think that's another way where instead of trying to figure out, if you want to go with like a third receiver or somebody like that, I think you could go Aaron Jones. You could get Rodgers. Lazard, I think, is going to be locked in to one of the top 3 roles, probably top 2. And then Christian Watson gives you that upside. Obviously they went up to get him. I don't really think you need to mess with the slot guys because those aren't going to really give you, the yardage upside. Although we have seen Randall Cobb score a ton of touchdowns in the past, but that was when he was a lot younger. So don't know if that's going to repeat. So yeah, like the Green Bay Packers stack, I think this is the way you attack it in best ball. And redraft, it's a lot dicier, where in redraft, it's kind of like more AJ Dillon than anybody else. I know you like Lazard too, but for me, it's been more AJ Dillon in redraft. And then in best ball, it's kind of the opposite. It's Jones, Rodgers, Lazard, Watson.
No, yeah, I love this. And, Rodgers, his ceiling is obviously a lot lower without Devontae Adams and even Marquez Valdez-Scantling. So you mentioned it earlier, a guy like Rodgers, he doesn't have as high of a ceiling. The one way to maximize that or raise it is to include a couple of pass catchers. So I do love the idea because Lazard and Watson are so cheap. And let's face it, it's not like Rodgers is going to suck. He's not going to finish outside of the top 15. He's going to have his yards. He's going to have his touchdowns. So just like correctly guessing which 2 or 3 he's going to be targeting, really raises the ceiling. So I think Rodgers might be a little bit of a reach, but you're going to get value with everybody else. And then as a group, I mean, the ceiling's massive. So that's what you're trying to do with a stack in general. So that's why this is a pretty sneaky one.
Yes, sir. All right. Well, that's gonna do it for our best ball pod. That was some good stuff. If you guys like the podcast, remember, if you give us a 5-star review on Apple, you will be in the running to receive a free year of an Action Network Pro subscription with our season-long weekly rankings, draft kit, all that good stuff. So be sure to do that. We really appreciate you guys for tuning in each and every week as we start ramping up, headed toward the season. You can find Sean on Twitter at _oddsmaker. You can find me at Chris Raybon, Raybon, and you can find us at those same handles in the free award-winning Action Network app. Until next time, let's get this shmoney.